In this episode, we'll be focusing on the integration of custom copilot experiences with Dataverse and Power Apps. Today's guest is from Washington in the United States. Well, not originally, but she'll tell you about that. She works at Microsoft as a principal product manager in Dataverse. She's also a co-author of SQL Server 2017 machine learning service with R from way back in the day. Shaping Copilot experience within Dataverse, Power Apps, and Copilot Studio is one of her missions. You can find links to her bio, social media, etc. in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. I always love for guests to tell a bit about their story outside of work. And of course, work does encroach over into a lot of what we do outside of work.
Yeah.
But tell me, food, family, and fun, what do they mean to you?
Oh, food. Okay. I like ice cream, so I'm going to
Nice.
a little bit about that. But there's a new one. It's funny because since we're talking about family as well, so a lot of my family members are scattered around the world. Some in UK, some in Australia, and then here I am in the States. From time to time, I do get friends visiting. Some are MVPs like yourself, right? So some of my fun memories about having ice cream is when, like, my friend Heidi, actually, who is an MVP in the data platform side, we go to like shop around this like ice cream aisle, and we look at this mochi boba ice cream, and yeah.
Nice.
So that's my favorite one right now.
That's awesome. And what do you do for fun outside of eating ice cream?
Gonna have to work it off, don't I? So yeah, my favorite's actually going for walks because it kind of helps clear the mind a little bit. But
yeah,
other than that, travel, which I get lucky to be able to do it in quite a bit for work, but in general, way when I was younger, I was traveling a lot more than I do now. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite country?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I cannot not mention about what I consider as my home country now, which is Australia. Well, now that I've lived here for a long time, so it kind of gets a bit confusing, like, where is my home country? But I grew up in Australia, so that has to be my favorite because most of my family members is there. But if I were to visit somewhere else, I would have to say maybe Holland, mostly because also got a few friends there, good friends there, and food's pretty good. Yeah.
Very cool. How did you end up being in Microsoft? I know you were at MVP at one point, but how did your life path take you to Microsoft, and particularly even to Microsoft Redmond, being that, there's 14 subs around the world that you could work within, but you're working, as they say, for the mothership?
Yeah. Great point. Great question there. So I started my career actually in the database area. So I think one of the first things that I learned back in the day, this is because I also grew up in Indonesia. We got to learn a lot of different sort of like old systems like DBase 3+. I know some of you are probably out there that have been in the database world probably kind of knew that. But anyway, so I ended up somehow landing in the database space more, which is SQL Server, or which was SQL Server at the time. Yeah, and then I got awarded MVP through all the community work. And I figured out like, hey, it's actually really good to, be able to advocate for Microsoft products and solving customers' problems with the Microsoft stack. Some of you, this is kind of dating me a little bit. Some of you probably remember of the BI burger back in the day with the SQL Server, with the SSRS and all that kind of stuff, like the data warehousing stack. So I used to kind of recall like, oh, that's kind of fun. I do wonder, like, how would they do that? Like, how would Microsoft actually think about coming up with all these different features or products? So I decided one time just to apply and got to meet with a few Microsoft folks. And then I applied, and then they let me, choose which team I wanted to be part of. And then I decided, since my background was actually analytics, I decided to join the SQL Server telemetry team.
Mm-hmm.
That was an amazing space to learn about how SQL Server was built, like, because I had to figure out like all the different features that are available out there. So yeah, I got to learn with, work with a lot of telemetry. So it was kind of fun. And then I decided, hey, I wanted to be more of a front-facing product management sort of role. So how do I get into that? And eventually landed in Charles's org, which is Business Applications Platform Group. And I've been very thankful of that, because there's a lot more exposure for trying a lot of new things, like, some of the things that you kind of mentioned during the introduction about, Copilot. My team have been able to kind of work on that. So it's very exciting stuff.
That's awesome. And so specifically, are you, what area are you working in? The Power Platform's a big product. Well, it's many products. It's a interesting ecosystem. Are you specifically, because of your database background, in the Dataverse area of things?
Yeah, great question. It somehow sort of morphed into beyond just the database aspect of it, but essentially just working with data overall. Now, this is a bit of a fun story. I recall the first time I had my Power Platform, the MPPC, the Power Platform conference. The very first time I joined, I was co-presenting with Tim Solinik. I think you've had him on the show, right?
Hey, James.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're just having a chat, and I was saying like, hey, you do realize that in SQL, I could do this really fast because I know, the syntax of SQL pretty well. And so since then, I was thinking about, maybe the user experience for, creating tables in general, or bringing data into Dataverse especially for enterprise data or for business applications, could be way improved. So it's just taking of, from some of my background as, from the pro code, but how do we introduce it so that when you are low code developers, or even if you are pro code developers, it should be pretty easy for you to create tables and bring data in. So it all started from there. And some of the thinking that I had at the time was, can we use something like GPT? This was before the OpenAI, big announcement on the ChatGPT. So we're exploring that, and then sure enough, within weeks, that announcement was there, and we were able to leverage a lot more on the large language models for a number of things that we are enabling for makers. So I have to say I'm very, very fortunate to be part of this journey, being able to enable for our low code, no code makers.
Nice. So your day-to-day role involves what? What, as in, are you just focused now on Copilot, or are you focus it on Copilot in the context of data, which, every AI needs data to operate? How do you explain that?
So the team that I work in, we ensure that you can bring knowledge easily. And if you are to use knowledge for your Copilot, you can do that easily as well. So essentially everything that I'm working now is about knowledge.
Okay, so let's expand the concept of knowledge. What does knowledge mean to you?
Great question. So knowledge right now, to me, means enterprise data. Enterprise data could also be general knowledge as well, like what's available in the public out there. But for the context of most of the time, I'm thinking about more in the enterprise data side of things, and it's actually beyond Dataverse. So some of the things that we are enabling for within the Copilot Studio, where you can ground your own custom copilots with enterprise data. It's cross collaboration with a lot of different teams, of course. But one of the things that we're enabling is not just being able to allow makers to grant their custom copilots with Dataverse as enterprise data, but also some of the other, what we call third-party connectors, right? The Copilot connectors, which actually technically under the hood, it's leveraging the Microsoft Graph connections. So very exciting space.
So just because I I haven't fully got knowledge nailed down in my head, because are you thinking, or are you meaning, like, let's say as an organization, we have all our enterprise data and they'll be, distributed across many systems. So, from a file share perspective, we could be on some HP trim type environment, or we could be in, of course, SharePoint. A lot of that unstructured data might sit.
Mhm.
If a customer is, been embedded in Microsoft for many years, they probably do have a lot of SharePoint repositories, that data would sit in. But it could be various SQL systems. It could be, anything from POS systems to ERP systems. When you're talking about the organization's knowledge, are you talking about all their data?
That's the mission. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So here's one of the things I've been discussing with friends lately, which is the minute you light up all that data to the graph,
Mm-hmm.
any data sloppiness is potentially going to be exposed, right? And for years, people have not known that data was accessible because they didn't know how to query.
Yeah.
Right? Because day-to-day, individuals are not experienced queries, as in the best they could do is probably do a search engine search. And most people have used search engines way below what their capabilities are. I remember back in the day reading a book when I was in web design, and this was a very long time ago. There was a book called Google Hacks, and it was basically designed to allow you to do search querying, through just the standard search tool that Google had. And of course, you could extract all sorts of things: credit card numbers, passwords, all different types of file formats, etc. If you knew how to create a really robust query, you could access that data. Now with the graph, the Microsoft Graph coming online in the context of copilots, in the context of all knowledge of an organization, there's potentially a massive amount of data sloppiness and governance standards that perhaps haven't been implemented because no one's known how to find that information. And of course, in a world where you can, ask an LLM that has reasoned over that information,
Mm-hmm.
even PII data, where it might not contain the full data set of an individual, like their name, their date of birth, their address, but there might be fragments of their data all over the organization. And all of a sudden, LLM, brilliant at finding patterns, can all of a sudden start bringing together a lot of information that in its individual formats would be meaningless, but as a consolidation would be very interesting.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in this space? Are you seeing that, that any organization that first of all does a copilot implementation really needs to carry out a security sprint following to actually do some housekeeping around the data that is now exposed?
Yeah. A great point. Actually, that's one of the things that we have discussed before. You're actually bringing a fresh perspective from the other dimension. So a lot of the discussions that I've been into recently, it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. Like, how do you make sure that the data is clean enough to be consumable? So that's one aspect. But you're also adding that dimension of the security. So garbage security in, garbage security out. So definitely those are the two things that we are considering as well. So something for as practitioners or as customers are adopting this, we highly recommend to kind of think through how you organize your data before. Of course, the whole data governance is an important concept, but now it's even making it more important or prevalent to all enterprises. It's very important to kind of look into it. Especially if you're, especially when you're building apps, you should look into it. But with Copilot, of course, it makes it super easy. So therefore, there's much more kind of care needs to be given to the governance of data in itself. Yeah.
Nice. You talked about grounding your information, and can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So with GPT, so if you're actually using the Copilot, that when you go to like Bing.com, you can ask, the Copilot version search stuff, right? So that is typically when the answer is provided, it's usually grounded with some data. In most cases, when you ask kind of generic questions like where is Gold Coast, and then it kind of answer like Gold Coast is in Australia. Yeah. So it typically sort of like source it and provide citation. Hey, this information comes from this. So that's what we mean by grounding with the data, so that it's specific to what the Copilot can answer. It doesn't use like Bing today, or the Copilot that you can use from Bing. It doesn't actually use enterprise data, on your local machine, right? So because you don't set it up that way, or nobody set it up that way. So when you build a custom Copilot, and this is an experience that already existed even prior to build, where you can build a custom Copilot and you can say, hey, I just want to ground it, or I want to use it as a data source for the Copilot, just maybe only from this website, or from this SharePoint site, yes, or from this file. So specifically, let's just making it super easy to illustrate. Say if I was to upload a file that discusses onboarding guide, then and I add it to my custom Copilot. So that Copilot is grounded with that onboarding guide. So if I were to ask questions like, where's the best sushi? Then it shouldn't answer that, right? Because nice. It is just using it's just answering based on the based on the data that I've provided it as a maker. Yeah.
Nice. So with the connectors that you're talking about, is the idea that if enterprise data is available, or knowledge is available, that you will be able are you more focused on Copilot Studio, like as in custom Copilots, or are you more in the concept of M365 Copilot and bringing the data in and making that available to the organization?
Yeah, great point there. So the ones that we are releasing, or that we have released in build, is related to custom Copilot specifically. And there is also a Copilot extension that you can do, and that is usually done via plugins. So we're working on improving that. So hopefully it's more of a seamless experience. So when we talk about Copilot connectors in general, it means knowledge, but it also means plugins, which essentially is connectors or actions, right? So yeah.
And role-based access control, is that all part of the thinking here? Because from my history in Dataverse and pre-Dataverse, one of our big selling points to customers was this, that we could secure down to a field level, whether someone was allowed to see it, edit it, update it, that type, the normal type processes through the UI. Do those, what you're producing therefore honor that type of role-based access, so we don't have people, for example, say, accessing, let's say, a data set in Dataverse that their role doesn't give them privilege to?
Yeah. So if you're using Dataverse as your knowledge to your Copilot, then it will honor the role-based access, the RBAC, for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah, and including, even if we talk about, the graph connections, it will also honor that, whatever data access that you may have, obviously, whatever that is set up from Microsoft Graph.
Awesome. What are you most excited about the next 12 to 24 months in what you're working, and what you can share around, and why I don't even think 24 months probably nowadays is too far ahead to be looking, right? Because so much change is happening in the 12-month window we're in. But what's exciting you?
I mean, it's hard to predict what the future is like in terms of technology perspective. But I think our journey in Copilot, I think it's just begun. I know that we started it over a year ago, but I think there's more to come. Some of the things like, we discussed about the data governance that will become more important. I think people are going to care more and more about their data. Yeah, and lots of exciting things to look forward to. Yeah.
Nice. Now, an exclusive on the show, we're going to do a demo. Is that right? As in, we don't normally. So if you're listening to this, the demo will be over on YouTube on my channel. But Julie, do you want to go and show us a few things?
Yeah, I actually want to show you a couple of things, and I'll try to do the kitchen show, or the cooking show method where
Nice.
let me show you like how you get started, and then here's one that I kind of created earlier. So let me start sharing my screen. The first one that I wanted to talk about is how, as a maker, you can get started with data modeling and inserting or creating data or creating tables rather, really easily with the help of Copilot. If you want to try this at home, and depending on when you're airing this, Mark, there is a few settings that you have to do because at the moment it's still in the early preview sort of stage. We will make it public preview very soon. When you create a new environment, or if an environment, or if you already have an environment where it's in the preview region, so that means you have to go to the admin center and look at your environment settings to make sure that it's in the preview region. You can see this try the new data experience. Now, when you click on the try new data experience, either you can type in from here or start with data, or this is actually to build app. But if you want to kind of just stop at the table side, then you go to the tables and then click on this beautiful button called create new tables. And here you'll be presented what I would say as kind of like a blank canvas where you can start doing some data modeling with Copilot. For the purpose of the discussion, I'm just going to start using the start with Copilot. So essentially using natural language, we'll start designing or modeling data using Copilot with the help of Copilot there. But you could also do a similar things with SharePoint list and Excel file where you bring in your existing data to create new tables. So I'll go ahead with clicking on the start with Copilot. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to say student accommodation reviews. So essentially what I'm providing here is just like a prompt. Hey, I want to create a data model or ERD diagram related to like a system to store student accommodation reviews. So I can do some, optimization in terms of like, hey, do you want just the one table or multiple tables, what table size, etc., whether to include relationships or not, and then I'll click generate. So it'll take a few seconds to create.
That's pretty cool because I remember almost a year and a half ago in Charles Lamana's session when this first came out, you could only do a single table. You couldn't do anything like relationships or anything like that.
Yeah.
That is cool to see that new functionality there.
Yeah, because my data set, or I guess not data set, domain that I'm actually talk about, what I actually relate to student accommodation reviews. That's why it comes up with 2. You can add more tables, by the way, after as well, like within the same experience, the same canvas. Had you put, I think some of the ones that I find interesting when you ask Copilot to do is like hotel registration systems. Usually it comes up with about 3 tables or so. So let's take a look here. When you click on student accommodation, it gives you some sample data. And likewise, when you click on accommodation reviews, you get some sample data as well. So that way, as a maker, as you're creating or designing your tables, you can kind of roughly, especially if you want to create apps after, you can roughly start testing out your app with some data, right? Because it's usually pretty helpful to do that. In case you want it to be a bit more relevant to you. So for me, since we talked about Australia earlier, so I could ask Copilot to help me, change this value of CTA to CTE. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to say, hey, change location value in student accommodation table to cities in Australia. So fingers crossed, hopefully it works. Again, just to want to reemphasize, this is still in early preview, so hopefully it works. Ta-da! Locations all changed to Sydney, Adelaide. And I can add 5 more rows in student accommodation. Sometimes I'm not good in spelling, but the good news is that GPT usually picks it up pretty well as well. Like, you have a typo here. We roughly know what you're talking about.
I found that too. Brilliant. I tell you what, I wish I had this like 15 years ago when all the demos I've done in my career and the hassle always of getting sample data that was meaningful. How quick is this? Amazing.
Yeah. So when you click on save and exit, then tables will be created. So in this, so I actually already created the table, so I won't click on the save and exit because otherwise I'll create duplicated tables, which I don't want to do. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and you can keep adding tables as well. Now, the next one that I wanted to do. So you've seen how as a maker, I'm getting help from Copilot to help me design my data. Now, the question is, what can I do with it after? So if you're familiar with Power Apps, like Canvas apps specifically, then when you create these tables and create an app, you have the whole Copilot sidecar that you can start adding. So that way you can, make your app to be Copilot ready, so to speak, for your end users. Now, speaking for end users, now we're talking about how makers can create their own custom Copilot so that their end users can start asking questions against this, Copilot. So you can think of this custom Copilot like as if it's perhaps a bot that you want to add to your own website, or maybe to Teams as well. So here's one that I actually prepared earlier. So let me just make the real estate a little bit bigger here. So I've created a student accommodation finder custom Copilot. It's super easy to do. If we have time, I'll show you the kind of the flow. But once you create it, you can keep adding knowledge. So in this case, I've already added a few different knowledge sources. If you want to add a new one, you just click on the plus add knowledge, and then you can specify, public website, files, SharePoint, Dataverse, Fabric is coming soon, or any of the enterprise data that you have your graph connections set up already by your tenant admin. So just for simplicity, I'll show you Dataverse since, we love Dataverse. Here, you'll see some recommendation regarding what table should we use. Here we go. So it suggests student accommodation. The way it suggested it is based on the Copilot name. So if you give meaningful Copilot name, your custom Copilot a meaningful name, rather than just Copilot 123.
Yeah.
Usually the recommendation here will be a little bit more tuned to that Copilot that you're creating. So I've already added this, but just for the sake of demo, let me just show you what that looks like if you were adding from scratch. You can add multiple tables up to 15, whether related or unrelated, it doesn't matter. Under the hood, the system or the Copilot will figure out the relationships. Interestingly, a little bit of, lifting the details a bit more here. We use what we call a natural language to SQL. So that's our RAG or retrieval augmented generative or generated method. So under the hood, you have, we will translate your prompt into to SQL, so your natural language to a SQL statement. From that perspective, the system will just figure out like what would be the relevant tables to use to answer your questions. So once you're happy with the selection of the tables, you get to preview it just to make sure that these are the right tables. This preview are just showing you a couple, like a few columns. It won't show the entire columns. Once you're happy with it, then you click next, and then you can also provide things like synonyms here. So as an example, you could say, let's go to the student accommodation one here. So for example, accommodation name, maybe you want to, add things like dorm name or whatever colloquial kind of names that are applicable to you or to your enterprise. We can also add glossary as an example. You can say, hey, accommodation. Let's say housing is the same as student accommodation, or maybe hostel or something. Then you click back, and then you click add. So once you click add, so I won't add it for now. But once you click add, it will be added to the screen here, where you can also navigate to knowledge. You can edit it further. So this is the one that I've made changes. I've created before. Preview, synonyms, glossary, it's all the same thing. Then this is where I can start asking questions, which is earlier I asked like, hey, which dorm has rating of more than 4? We can ask it again. Whoops. Let me press F7. Let me just click allow. Hopefully my Control-C, Control-V works. There you go. Yeah, so it can start asking questions and it will provide citation as well. So in this instance, it will take a little bit, I think, to answer. But in this instance where, oh, there you go, it comes up with the answers already. In the instance where, let me just go back to knowledge. In the instance where I ask questions related to who wrote a book about, Australia's dangerous snakes, this question is best sourced from the PDF file that I've provided. Then it also provides that citation as well. So if you click on it, you get to see the preview of that, a simple preview of that PDF file. Yeah. So this is how you test your Copilot. And eventually, once you do the publishing, which I haven't done for this environment yet, in case you want to do publishing, sorry, let me just go to channels rather than publish. This is an area where you can control or you can manage the channels that you want to enable this Copilot for. So one of them is Microsoft Teams. So this is one that I've created earlier. So a similar Copilot that I've published to Teams, where it actually just, grounded with the accounts table. I can ask questions like, where's Adventure Works located? It's okay in Santa Cruz. So this is how we think the future will be, where you can now start asking Copilot questions, not just from, for example, just from, your website as a, chatbot or so, but more in the productivity tools like Microsoft Teams. So there's a lot of powerful things that you can leverage from Copilot Studio.
I see that audio queries are going to become the norm, right? As in, like, you won't even have to necessarily go through an app interface. You'll just be able to query and get answers. It's it's an awesome change for me. Dyslexic typing, spelling is always an issue. I have a lot less issue with that now in a Copilot world. So it's definitely an enabling type tool. Before I let you go, I wrote a post in 2018, 2019, and was controversial. And it's something that I like to do every now and again. I like to be controversial to get a discussion going. It was around, a lot of people were complaining around things like diversity and inclusion and things like this, that, in my case, if you're a middle-aged white guy in tech, they don't want you to front any events anymore or anything because you're not, diverse enough. And so I wrote something with a headline to that effect. And of course, a lot of people only read headlines. They don't read the blog post. And of course, all the people that read the headline agreed with me were all those people that were anti this type of sentiment. But as I go down there, as I drilled into the topic, I said the importance of, when somebody looks up to somebody presenting in tech leadership, and of course I'm only focused on tech because that's what I'm in, it's important that they see somebody like me. And so therefore, if it's a teenage girl looking, they need to see female role models. If it's any across the inclusion or diversity landscape, people need to see role models that they go, you know what? I identify with them because they're similar to me. I can see, and although middle-aged white guys have had the stage for many years, it is time for change. What are your thoughts around that? Women in tech. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So here's what I will say with a little bit of I guess caveat. Like I cannot represent the entire women in tech, but I can share some of my perspectives, which is I would probably say to a certain degree unique on its own, but maybe some of the learnings can be useful for somebody out there. So a bit of background, I did have the privilege of having quite strong role models. So for example, like my mom owns a business and it's in the hardware sort of, when we talk about hardware, we're talking about like nuts and bolts, not software, not computer or anything like that. So it was pretty interesting to see. So it's sort of like, oh, mom can do that. So I think I could probably kind of get into more on the technical side of it as well, like if needed. And there's a lot of business thinking as well as math thinking around that. So that's one aspect of me. The other aspect of me, like, how I grew up that I also consider as privileged too, is that I did grow up in Indonesia when I was much younger, and studying computer science was mandatory. Everybody got to learn it. And I just happened to love it. So I usually kind of like ace the class. So coming to more Western countries, so as an example, Australia, I found myself a little bit dumbfounded in which I chose my elective, my computer science, to be my elective. And I was the only female, also non-English. English is my second language too.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, wow, like the world is very different. So I had some of the things that kind of helped me think a little bit more that the world is just outside of me, that there are a few different sort of like diverse perspectives. So what I, personally from myself, I strive to give different perspectives to, or at least my perspective to other folks, on also to welcome others as well. Now, there are lots of articles, discussions out there where women are struggling in this space. I'm not discounting that. Definitely it's there. So I wanted to give a bit of different perspective, what it feels like to be supported. And just to a bit of a disclaimer as well, it's not like all through my career I'm always supported. That's not the case. It's just that there are a few points in the career that in my career that I noticed, oh, I know when I think I feel at my best, where I feel supported. And that looks something like this. Usually the discussion within the team, everybody feels like it's okay to make mistakes. So and it's okay that we are on the basis of learning. We didn't know about something, and then we use it as a learning experience. Sometimes it's to do with technical stuff, like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm kind of new to this. Can you help me understand X, Y, and Z? Could be about, copilot knowledge or whatever, or what RAG means or what LLM means. And then being able to do kind of like active listening and learning from there. But in some cases, it might be behavioral thing. So if somebody said something maybe a little bit hurtful, if you can, and this is very, I would say, depending the power dynamics and your situation, right? If you're in a situation where you can feel safe, then you could say, hey, can we talk a little bit? I think that the stuff that you mentioned before could be interpreted differently for other people. So how do we think about rephrasing that? Like, what's the intent behind it? Another thing that I wanted to bring up is just because it's not your intention. So if you say hurtful things, it's not your intention though, but it doesn't mean that it's less hurt for the recipient.
100%.
Overall, a couple of things that I would say I draw from this experience is that when I'm in the team setting, when it's not zero-sum game. So when we play win-win, I think it's not just from women perspective, but I think from the team all around, we feel like we are respected. We can be put into a position that, hey, I'm accountable for this. My teammates are, making me accountable for this too. And you actually, become your better self too. So, so those are some of the things that I've learned so far, where I started picking, some of the not behaviors, but some of the not symptoms, I don't know what characteristics, there you go. Characteristics of when I feel a bit more supported than some other experiences. So, and I have to say, where I am right now, I happen to get to witness that a lot. So very, very thankful of that too.
Yeah. That is so good. That is so good. And I love that story, particularly starting with your mum and having her own business. That's phenomenal. Julie, it's been awesome to have you on the show. Thank you. I look forward to having you back again in the future.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.